You've seen the pattern. A government prints a graphic warning label on a cigarette pack, and then, without skipping a beat, it collects a hefty tax receipt from that very same pack. Actually, don't call it hypocrisy. In the cold world of statecraft, that's simply a functioning business model. The reality is that in many corners of the globe, tobacco isn't just a health issue. It's a vital organ in the body of public revenue. Take China, for example, where public reporting has shown tobacco contributing around 7% of central government revenue in recent years. That is a staggering amount of money to walk away from. Strictly speaking, this isn't a morality story. It's a systems story. It's about how governments, much like the smokers they regulate, can become quietly addicted to the flow of cash. In this video, we're going to unpack 4 things. Why tobacco functions like the ultimate recession-proof cash machine. How governments manage to drive consumption down without actually breaking the bank. Why China serves as the clearest and most extreme case study of this model. And finally, why nicotine might be changing its shape, but is certainly not disappearing as a fiscal asset. Part 1. Why tobacco is economically perfect. What actually makes tobacco such a reliable cash machine? It really comes down to 3 things that, in any other industry, would be seen as a miracle. Demand that never dies, a product that's perfectly uniform, and a tax base that is impossible to hide. For starters, demand is what economists call inelastic. People don't keep buying cigarettes because the price is right. They buy them because nicotine has effectively rewired their brains. To a treasurer, this makes tobacco look less like a consumer good and more like a utility, something as essential and predictable as water or electricity. It's a revenue line that simply doesn't care about inflation or how the stock market is doing. But there's more to it. The product itself is a masterpiece of industrial standardization. A cigarette isn't some handcrafted luxury. It's a repeatable industrial output that can be forecasted with the kind of precision you'd expect from a Swiss watch. And finally, it's built to be taxed. Because it's sold in visible packs through licensed shops, it's like having a government toll booth on every street corner. Imagine a commuter in London or a factory worker in Ohio. They don't think they're funding a new bridge when they light up at 7 a.m. But as far as the Treasury is concerned, that morning cigarette is a microtransaction directly into the state budget. Think about it. It's perhaps the only tax people pay while satisfying a craving. The real secret sauce, however, is regulation. By banning ads and mandating expensive licenses, the state accidentally protects the big players. It creates a massive barrier to entry that makes the market much easier to supervise and almost impossible for a newcomer to disrupt. The state doesn't need to love smoking to appreciate the cash flow. It just needs a predictable behavior that it can harvest at scale. Part 2. The Global Government Playbook. So, what's the global strategy here? It's a delicate dance. Governments restrict marketing, hike up excise taxes, and fund anti-smoking campaigns. But if you watch closely, you'll notice they always try to push consumption down slowly, never all at once. You might wonder, why the gradualism? It's because a sudden collapse would trigger what we can call fiscal withdrawal. Many governments are effectively addicted to the taxes of people who are trying to quit. If everyone stopped smoking tomorrow, public health would celebrate, but national budgets would go into shock. Most states aren't looking for a total cure. They're looking for a tapered dose. This is why they manage the decline rather than ending it. They've turned tobacco into a controlled, high-margin channel that stays profitable even as it shrinks. The WHO estimates there were 1.2 billion tobacco users in 2024. While that's a drop from 2000, it still represents a massive, lingering tail of revenue. In OECD economies, these sin taxes usually bring in about 2% of total tax revenue. It's not the biggest slice of the pie, but it is certainly the most reliable. In a world of volatile trade and shifting markets, a tax on a chemical habit is a treasurer's best friend. The playbook is simple. Let volumes fall slowly, hike the tax per unit, and keep that revenue line as steady as a heartbeat. Part 3. China, the extreme version. Now, if you want to see this logic pushed to its absolute limit, you have to look at China. The difference here isn't a moral one, it's structural. In China, the state doesn't just regulate the industry, it literally owns it. Through a state-run monopoly, the government controls the entire cash flow engine from top to bottom. Consider this. In 2023, China sold roughly 2.4 trillion cigarettes. That is nearly half of every cigarette sold on the planet. This creates an equilibrium that is incredibly hard to break. You have an organization having a complex internal conversation with itself. The same entity that pays for anti-smoking billboards is the one running the factories that produce the packs. One hand protects the public lungs, while the other collects the profit. It's not necessarily a conflict of interest in their eyes, it's just a structural reality of their economy. China also perfectly illustrates why finding a replacement is so difficult. If you cut off a revenue stream this stable, you're forced to find a substitute. That means either raising income taxes, introducing property taxes, or making painful spending cuts. Tobacco, by comparison, is a tax on a behavior that the public already dislikes. It's one of the few taxes a government can raise without sparking a protest or losing public sympathy. For a treasury, that makes it the most convenient asset on the books. In this system, nicotine isn't just a habit, it's a managed commodity that keeps the gears of public finance turning without making a sound. Part 4. Who captures the money? If we map out the value chain, the hierarchy of power becomes very clear. At the very top, or upstream, you have the leaf growers. They do the hard work, but they have almost zero pricing power. Then, in the middle, you have the manufacturers and licensed operators. These are the giants who control the branding, the logistics, and the distribution networks. But here's the thing. At every single gate along this chain, the government is standing there with its hand out. In most industries, the state waits to tax your profits. But in tobacco, the state taxes the unit. They don't care if a company is having a bad quarter. They collect on every pack, every stick, and every gram. This is what transforms a simple product into a high-velocity fiscal machine. Think about the human moment at a kiosk. A customer buys a single pack, telling themselves it's just for today. No big decision, no paperwork, just a 30-second transaction. But for the state, this is the perfect tax base. It's small, it's frequent, and it's incredibly easy to track. Frequency is what turns a personal habit into a national revenue stream. This is exactly why governments almost always choose regulation over prohibition. A ban doesn't just stop people from smoking, it breaks the legal channel. And the channel is where the taxes live. When you break that channel, the state loses its revenue and its control at the same time, and that is a risk most treasuries simply aren't willing to take. Part 5. The future. Decline, but not disappearance. So, where does this leave us? In most Western countries, smoking rates have been sliding for decades, but don't mistake a decline in volume for a decline in power. The industry is simply entering its second act. If volumes fall, prices go up. If traditional cigarettes face tighter rules, nicotine simply shifts its format. We're seeing a pivot away from the stick toward a high-tech ecosystem of vapes, heated products, and nicotine pouches. New forms, but the exact same logic. Governments find themselves in that same old structural tension. They genuinely want lower smoking rates for the sake of public health, but they also have budgets that need to stay balanced. The solution? They fold these new alternatives into the existing system. They regulate them, they tax them, and they stabilize them. Over time, a country's fiscal reliance on nicotine might shrink, but it almost never vanishes overnight. Treasuries hate sudden holes in their balance sheets, and tobacco has been filling those holes for a very long time. The deeper lesson here isn't really about smoking at all, it's about the nature of state finance. When a behavior is predictable, taxable, and politically easy to target, it becomes a pillar of the state, almost by accident. At the end of the day, tobacco remains one of the strangest artifacts of modern capitalism. It is discouraged in public, yet harvested in our budgets. The market survives because human demand is sticky. The cash machine survives because taxing that demand is easy. And most importantly, governments struggle to quit because stable revenue is the rarest commodity in politics. If you want to truly understand the tobacco industry, you have to look past the slogans and follow the incentives. The warning label on the front of the pack tells you what the government wants you to do, but the tax receipt on the back? That tells you what they can't afford for you to stop doing. Stay curious, stay sharp,